Hi, everyone. Today, I am pleased to be joined by author, podcaster, lawyer, and executive coach, Sara Holtz, for a very special fireside chat on how women leaders can learn from other executive women experiences so that they can be more successful in their career. Sara, after graduating from Yale and Harvard Law School, served as vice president and general counsel for Nestlé Beverage Company and division counsel for the Clorox Company. Beginning in the late 90s through her firm ClientFocus, Sara began coaching thousands of women lawyers from leading law firms in both the US and Canada to help them grow their practices. Sara wrote the book on rainmaking for women lawyers. It's called Bringin in the Rain, a woman lawyer's guide to business development. Sara has also many firsts as a woman lawyer. She created the Women Rainmakers Roundtable, which is widely viewed as the gold standard in business development training for women lawyers. She was the first woman ever to chair the Association of Corporate Counsel, was honored by the State Bar of California for outstanding leadership, and she received the ABA's Margaret Brent Women Lawyers Achievement Award in recognition of her work to help women lawyers succeed. Now, Sara has just released her second book, Advice to My Younger Me, Career Lessons from 100 Successful Women. It is chock full of terrific insights for women professionals. And by the way, it's on the Amazon Business Books bestseller list, so go buy it. So without further ado, let's start our conversation. Welcome, Sara.
I'm delighted to be here, Laureen.
Great. I'm so excited to have you join us today because you bring such an interesting perspective to our audience, which is leveraging the experience of successful women in the workforce to deliver powerful insights that other women can learn from. So let's start by telling your audience, how did you come to write this second book and why did you decide to write this particular one?
Well, so for the past 5 years, I've had a podcast, which is called Advice to My Younger Me, in which I interviewed over 130 very successful women about what they wish they had known earlier in their careers. And there was so much wisdom shared in the podcast over those over 130 episodes that I wanted to capture it and make it accessible to a wider audience of women. And while the book is targeted to women, many men have told me that they found it of value too. And so I distilled all of that shared experience from those 130 plus women into
I was going to say, I know that there are 9 key themes or what you call key wisdoms. So tell our audience about those 9.
Sure. So I'm just going to run through them very quickly. We're going to talk in depth about a few of them. So the most important one is being the architect of your career. In other words, you need to be in the driver's seat of your career, not the passenger seat when it comes to your career. Then there's do your right work. And I understand we're going to talk about that a little bit more later.
Yep.
Take smart risks. Say no, so you can say yes to what matters.
Mm-hmm.
Invest in relationships. From my perspective, the most critical aspect of your career, asset of your career, is the network of relationships that you have.
Absolutely.
Ask for help. And there's 2 sides to that. Be willing to ask for it, which is a mindset thing, and do it in a way that is most likely to get the help you want. In other words, ask for the help very specifically. Then there's being visible. You want to get credit for your good work. This is important because the most important decisions that are made in your career, your salary increases, your promotions, your high profile assignments, they're all made in rooms that you aren't in. And then you want to get feedback. Sometimes you actually have to ask for that feedback. It's not volunteered to you. And don't be afraid of negative feedback. That can actually be the most valuable feedback you get. And then finally, stay in the workplace, or at least only leave it after carefully understanding the ramifications of leaving.
You know, it's interesting, Sara, because your book and these 9 pearls of wisdom were so kind of reaffirming for me, somebody who's towards the end of her career, because I've followed so much of this type of advice over my 40 years of working. So with that and wanting our readers to learn so much, what do you want your reader to take away from reading the book?
So I really want them to actually put the learnings from the book into action and to implement them in their own lives. And at the end of each chapter in the book, I have what I call coaching assignments, which are concrete actions that the reader should take to implement the advice contained in that chapter. And I hope the readers will actually do those assignments, because that's where the real value of the book is going to come from.
Totally. So in your book, you talk about the need to be both good at your job and good at your career. Now, I know those two are very different things. So tell us what you mean by this.
Well, women often overemphasize being technically good at their jobs. In other words, they spend hours refining their PowerPoint presentations.
Hmm.
They pride themselves on responding to every email, within 2 hours, whatever it may be. And obviously, you need to be good at your job to have a successful career, but that's actually just the price of admission. To be successful, you need to be good at your career too. And by that, I mean intentionally spending time on those things that are going to move your career forward in the long term.
Mm-hmm. So interesting, because I completely agree with you. Just from my own experience, I know that being good at your job is not what gets you promoted, builds your reputation, or pushes your career forward. You have to do other things to build your career. So tell us, what do you feel from your perspective are the things that really build a career?
So these are just a few examples. One of them is consistently staying in touch with the people who are in your network. And by your network, I mean this really broadly: people you went to school with, worked at previous jobs, know from activities you're involved in. And then there's consciously expanding your network to include people who can help you over the long term achieve your professional goals. Another example of focusing on your career as opposed to just your job is asking for stretch assignments or
Absolutely.
tapping into your network to get advice on challenges you face. And again, I mentioned this before, but seeking out feedback. So what's important here in all of these actions that I've outlined is developing a mindset that, in addition to the projects which are sitting on your desk and calling for your attention, you're also going to invest time and energy in activities that are important to your career in the long run. They may not have immediate payback, but they're the things which over the course of a career are really the things that are going to propel your career forward.
I can't agree with you more. And over my own career, I've been good at it sometimes and not sometimes else. So interesting. So one of the sections of the book that I actually enjoyed the most and was intrigued by was the two concepts that you talk about: right work. What is right work? And what is right work environment? So let's talk about both, but let's start with right work. What do you mean by that?
So I believe that each of us, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about this.
That's okay.
Technology.
It happens. It happens. No worries.
I believe that each of us has what I call your right work. And some people call it your strengths or your gifts or your talents, your unique abilities, your superpowers, lots of different names given into it, or simply what you're really good at. And I think that this is work that draws on your innate abilities. It's work that when you do it seems relatively easy for you to do. It's what you're doing when you produce your best results or when you have your most significant impact on the projects you're working on. It's those activities that you enjoy doing and you lose track of time when you're doing it. So some people call that being in the flow.
Being in the flow. I love it. I can totally relate to this concept, and it resonates with me. Why? Because here I am towards the end of my career, and I've actually found a position as managing partner of this professional services firm, FLG, that's based on my strong suits, which are my soft skills, as opposed to focusing on hard skill work that honestly, I can't say are my innate abilities. So tell us, tell the audience, how can they identify their right work?
So the key to identifying your right work is really paying attention. And it's both that simple and that hard. And it's being curious and reflecting on your work and your life experiences and asking yourself questions like, what parts of your job come easily to you? And what aspects of your work energize you? And when you're working on a project, what are you excited to volunteer for? Which roles are you excited to volunteer for? And When do you find yourself that you are in the zone? You lose track of time. You could keep doing it forever. And what is it that you bring to a project that has the most impact on the success of that project? So for example, is it helping a team that's drowning in data see the big picture? Or is it persuading senior management to greenlight a project that you're working on? Or is it developing the timeline and the accountabilities to keep a project moving forward? Like those are all different kinds of skill sets. And what are the ones which you're really good at?
So I know you talk about in your book how you get more of one's right work. So tell us a little bit about that. What do you think are the ways to get more right work?
Well, I think when you're talking about it in the work context and you're talking about like having to get something, spend more time doing something that's outside your job description or not doing something that's in your job description, what you want to do is sell the concept of you're spending more time doing your right work to your boss or whomever, with how that right work, how you're doing that right work is going to actually benefit the company. Like, how is it going to increase revenue? How is it going to reduce expenses? How's it going to keep a project moving forward or on budget? So how is it that you're doing more of your right work is actually going to achieve the company's objectives?
Totally get that. Great concept. Now let's shift, Sarah, to the right work environment. This, again, very much resonates with me. I get what you're saying. Tell us about right work environment. How do you find it?
Okay, so your right work environment simply is the physical environment in which you do your best work. So for example, some people find working in an open office, interacting with other people all day long, that's a stimulating.
That's me.
But for some people, those kinds of environments make them anxious, and it really actually reduces their productivity. And they do their best work head down in a private space where they can think undisturbed. By the way, that's me. And it's important to know what your right work environment is. And then within the constructs of your work environment, to try and do as much of your work as possible in your right work. And Laureen, you shared a story with me about why that open office thing is valuable to you and your right work environment. I think the audience might be interested in hearing that.
Well, it's interesting because I'm an introvert who needs people. And so what I love is the open workspace where I just have a desk plopped in the middle of all the action. And for me, I'm very engaged by going up and talking to this person. I love going and getting that coffee and hanging around the water cooler. I find that having people around me energizes me, and it allows me to offer them advice and counsel, and it allows me actually to do my best work. Not that I want to be in an office 5 days a week, but I do know that that is the right work environment for me over the long term. So yeah.
And, that's a perfect example of discovering how important it is. Imagine if you had those set of skills, but you were stuck in office with a closed door all day long. You wouldn't be nearly as effective at your job.
Absolutely. And I was just giving some coaching advice to a young man who's looking at a brand new job. And it's a job where he would be very much remote, even though he loves being in an office environment. So I said to him, you got to really think about that, because it's very different, and you really have to know what makes you tick and what really energizes you. So interesting conversation. So now let's pivot, Sarah, to another area in your book, which is, of course, the concept of taking risks. So you advocate for taking smart risks in your career. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I want to quote one of my interviewees on the podcast, and she said, all the best things that happened to her in her career were the result of taking a risk. And those risks might include, changing jobs or moving to a new city or asking your boss to send you to an expensive training program or suggesting an out-of-the-box approach to a problem that your team is dealing with. And women tend to be less risk takers than men. And that attribute of not being risk takers served us very well when we were in school. When we were given an assignment, we did a great job on that assignment, and that got us an A in school. And one of my guests said that if work were like school, women would undoubtedly be the stars in all situations. But the workplace really isn't like school. And that's like an important thing we have to recognize. And risk-taking is rewarded in the workplace.
Absolutely. Risks for women in particular often feel uncomfortable. So how does one become more comfortable taking those risks? What's your recipe for becoming more comfortable? I know you have one.
I love you're calling it a recipe. I'm going to steal that in the future.
Go for it.
And so first of all, I suggest that you start out by taking a risk history. And the goal of this is actually to help you realize that you're not as risk averse as you think. So what you do is you just think about the risks that you've taken in both your personal and your professional lives. So they might be things like you wound up taking a trip to Spain by yourself because the person you were supposed to be traveling with canceled at the last minute, or you invested in a stock and it either went up or it went down, right? Or you asked to be transferred to a different team. And then here's what is the important part. You want to reflect on how those risks turned out. So which of them turned out well and which of them didn't. And then reflect on, and this is really the key part, when something didn't work out as you had hoped, what happened instead? And in most cases, you'll discover that the terrible things that you imagined might happen, like you'd sit in your room in Spain the whole time crying because you were too scared to go out, that didn't actually happen. It may not have turned out as well as you had hoped, but it wasn't a disaster either.
So I think the audience would appreciate some examples, Sarah, from your own career in terms of taking risks, and some of which were failures perhaps, and then some of which were raging successes. So share with the audience a bit.
So you're outing me here, but I actually share all of this as well. So as Laureen mentioned, I was the general counsel at Nestlé Beverage, and I decided I had 2 young children and, demanding career and a husband who worked and all of those things. And I decided to quit my lawyering job to start a mediation practice. And at the end of 2 years of consistent marketing of that mediation practice, I had made $30,000. I really hadn't understood what the market was in terms of hiring mediators. And I think you can say that experiment was a major failure, right? So then I pivoted and I started a business doing educational seminars for law firm lawyers about meeting client needs. It was something I thought I knew a lot about, and I thought there would be a market for it.
I remember.
But that one didn't pan out either. It turned out that the conference business is less about content creation, which actually is part of my right work, and more about event planning, which is definitely not my right work. So there I had, 2 significant failures. Then I started my coaching business, training women lawyers on how to develop business. And many people at the outset told me that they thought it was a crazy idea, and that, it was good. Now we were on to failure number 3. But I had confidence that it would fill an important need in the marketplace. So as it turned out, that business succeeded beyond my wildest dreams. And that's what I did for the next 25 years.
And it was a raging success. We're both lawyers. We've both worked together at Clorox many, many years ago. And I think those 2 supposed failures really kind of set you up, right, for the success of your third business. And as I remember in the 90s, what a big need there was, because so many women lawyers were coming up for the first time as partners, didn't know, excuse my French, diddly squat, right, about how to develop business. So I think you found a niche and you hit it hard. So
I want to make one comment about it.
Yeah, go for it.
Looking back today, those 2 significant failures, and they definitely were that, I barely remember them. And I just did
great.
Is something that happened a long time ago before I launched a successful business. And I think that's important to remember, because that's a theme I heard over and over again from my guests, which was that mistakes, which at the moment seemed completely career limiting, turned out to just be like, oh, that thing happened to me.
So that's a perfect segue to the next question, which is, so How do you learn? Tell our audience, how do you learn to take a risk after you may have had a failure like the two that you're describing? Tell us about how you learn to take the risk.
So I have this concept that I call you need to develop your risk muscle. And by that, I mean, you need to increase your comfort with taking risks. And you can do that with a number of different actions. So the first one is to start taking small risks. And I define small risks as things that are about 10% outside your comfort zone. And this, another thing to do is to don't wait to start taking risks until you feel like you've really nailed your job. Like, I am really good at it. I'm excelling at it. You want to start taking risks now, tomorrow, today. And you don't want to wait until you're the CEO, when the risks that you take are so much more consequential and so much more visible. By the time you get to that senior position, you want to have a well-developed sense of how you evaluate risks and how you recover from failures. And so you need practice.
So basically what I'm hearing is lots of silver lining and failures. And in terms of taking risks, start small, evaluate them, and that builds your risk muscle, to use your term, to kind of move forward in a big way in your career. So let's pivot again. And in the book, I mean, you interviewed so many remarkable women, but if you look at all the interviews, what was the most surprising advice you heard from them?
So I have to say this was completely surprising to me. The thing that most surprised me was that woman after woman said some version of the most important career decision you make is who you partner with in your personal life, right?
And that's
nothing to do with career, right?
And that's interesting because I've heard that before, and I think it's right on. I remember Sheryl Sandberg in her book Lean In talking about selecting that right life partner, right? Somebody who encourages you and all of that sort of thing in terms of being able to keep building your career. So tell us more about that.
Well, so I think it is, when I started reflecting on it, really a critical part of your career success. And even in this environment where we're embracing career gender diversity and inclusion, that partner may be harder to find than you might hope. There was a recent study done at Harvard Business School, and they asked the men and women who were all MBA candidates, do you expect your career will be of equal importance to your partner, to that of your partners? And overwhelmingly, the women said yes. They expected their careers to be viewed as equally important as their partners. But sadly, the men thought that their careers would be primary. So, I think what this says is you really need to engage in conscious conversations with people you're considering being your life partner, and pick a partner who believes that your career is important as his, assuming you're in a heterosexual relationship. And then don't be reluctant to negotiate with your partner to fairly distribute your household and childcare responsibilities down the line. And, this is not a one and done conversation.
Correct.
And as one of my guests put it, I love this phrase, don't let your partner be your glass ceiling. Don't let the person that you're committed to be the person who's holding you back in your career.
I love that term, and it's so right on. It really is. I think that's important for our audience to hear. Let's turn to the last topic of our conversation, and this is somewhat controversial. By the way, I completely agree with your advice here and your thoughts. But one of your chapters in the book is called "Stay in the Workplace," and this is an interesting one. So, why do you give that advice to women, Sarah? Tell us your thoughts here, because I think this is a highly charged but very important topic.
Yeah, so it is highly charged. And I guess I would begin by saying that leaving the workplace has very significant ramifications, financially, career-wise, even for you personally. And too often, I think women underestimate the consequences. And, as I said, the consequences are, first of all, there's financial, right? It's estimated that women give up 4 times their salary for every year that they're out of the workplace. Pretty significant number. And that's because of lost income, lost wage growth, retirement benefits that are lost, investment gains that they might have gotten on the money that they would have invested with the excess salary that they had, or their availability to have that money to invest. Then there's the career costs, and it still in this day and age, it's the rare person who leaves the workforce for a significant time, and by significant I'm saying here like 2 years or more, who can re-enter at a comparable position and a comparable pay. And that's because skills and markets change in a very short period of time these days. And that makes your time out of the workplace seen by the person who might be considering hiring you as a risky hire. And then finally, there's the personal costs. And work provides us with all kinds of benefits, which I think sometimes women are uncomfortable about embracing, like that they get good stuff out of work.
Right.
And there are things like they contribute to your sense of identity. They contribute to your sense of contribution. Work provides stimulation and challenge, and it provides a network of people who are your friends, and hopefully it provides you with some recognition that you're doing your job well.
I could not agree with you more. And what my recommendation would be to any woman who is thinking of taking a significant amount of time off would be, if you can stay in the workplace, even if it's a few consulting projects, so that you don't have that white space on your resume, right? And you stay involved, but it might be on a 15-hour week basis, or it might be on a 10-hour week basis, whatever, but stay in the workplace, be connected at least, so that when you go for that next big job, you don't have that white space. You can explain away, well, I had some parenting issues that I needed to take care of or whatever, but that I was able to stay in and do consulting assignments or part-time fractional work, whatever. But I can't agree with you more. Staying in the workplace and being productive will always lead you to the next best place in your career, as opposed to taking lots of time off. So can't agree with you more.
I just like to circle back on this because it goes back to the very first point, the distilled wisdom, which was being the architect of your career, which is oftentimes those kind of alternative work situations that you've described.
Yeah.
They require you to create those opportunities, not, those aren't advertised. There's not an advertisement out there that, you can be a part-time partner in a law firm, or that, there's consulting opportunities out there. So you need to really take the initiative to make those things happen. But they're definitely out there.
Right. And it also goes back to your other pearls of wisdom, which is, if you want to take that time off, but you still want to stay in the game by consulting fractional part-time work, you're going to need your network to get those assignments, right? So that's why keeping those relationships, nurturing them is so important, because in my case, I've often gotten my next position through a referral from a network, rarely using executive recruiters. And I've gotten consulting and fractional work from my network. So again, another pearl of wisdom that really, really is important. So I think we're at the end of the content session portion of our section. So we did great time-wise, and I hope our audience enjoyed the conversation. We're going to do some chat, but before we get to the chat room, just wanted everyone to know that Sarah's book, Advice to My Younger Me, is available on Amazon if you would like to purchase it. So let's see if we have any chat. So right now I'm not seeing any questions from our chat room. So I have a question for you, Sarah. So one of the things we didn't cover in this conversation, but is near and dear to my heart, because I've had to negotiate compensation for multiple people, executive groups and companies, as well as myself. Any learnings from your pearls of wisdom, et cetera, on how to, if I'm a female executive and, I'm offered a great job, or I'm in a situation where I'm being promoted and I need to look at the comp package that's offered. Any learnings on how to do that best?
Well, again, I'm not a negotiation expert. We've actually had a number of them on the podcast. And frankly, it's not a subject that I deal with in any great depth in in the book. But one thing I would say, and frankly, I think you should give us some tips on those things.
Well, I'll give you my tips after you give yours first.
but what I would say is this is an example of that taking a risk, right? When we say about taking smart risks, I mean, you look at this and you say, first of all, I think sometimes women are overly grateful about anything good that happens to them.
Totally. I completely agree.
So I remember when I was working with women partners in law firms, and they were not in a good situation as far as where their compensation or whatever. And I would say to them, so have you thought about moving to a different firm? And they would say, oh, I couldn't possibly move because 10 years ago, when I asked for maternity leave, they gave me 3 months, right? And I call that the overly generous attribution of doing a favor for you, right? Like 10 years later, this is really irrelevant. So I think part of the importance of dealing with your negotiating your promotion or your compensation or whatever is really focusing on the fact that you're entitled to do it. You don't need to feel overly grateful that men negotiate all the time for their compensation. And, why don't you're entitled to do it. So I guess what I would say, it's a lot of mindset to say, I add value. This is what I'm worth in the marketplace. Absolutely. And I don't need to accept the first offer that comes my way.
It's interesting because I always tell young women or young professional women when I'm coaching them in this area, which is, I know this sounds a little bit interesting, but you got to almost think like a man. Right. And that is particularly if you don't really know your worth yet in terms of the economics of your job. Think like a man. Would a man leave anything on the table? Would he say no to a promotion or a big raise? You know what the answer to that is. So know your worth. Think high. Don't leave anything on the table, but do your research, right? Before you even get to the table in terms of what's the salary range in the market for this job? What's market on bonus? Know all about the equity granting and what the equity value would be worth. But again, I always tell people, think like a man. A man would leave nothing on the table and could even ask for more. Don't, to your point, feel like, you know what, I'm just so grateful for what they're offering me. I'm going to take it. Nope. Ask for more. And particularly in today's marketplace where you really can. It's interesting. So I think we have some comments. So let's look at them. Love the conversation. We'll buy the book ASAP. Can you speak to the benefits of staying within the corporate world, Sarah, versus starting your own consulting business? So this is from Kelly.
Yes. So, and I hope Laureen will jump in here as well. First of all, I think, how satisfying is your job right now in the corporate world? Are you somebody with an entrepreneurial personality? There's some people who are good at being entrepreneurs and some people who aren't. And that's not a judgment. Some people love the entrepreneurial world and some people it's incredibly anxiety producing. So, do you feel like you've reached the dead end in your corporate career? Do you feel like your corporate career will never offer you the satisfaction you want? I think those are kind of all the things that go into play.
And maybe, Kelly, taking the cue from Sarah's book, kind of do that risk history or risk assessment. What are you getting out of the corporate world versus starting your own consulting business? What are the risks? Do you feel that you can own those risks and accomplish what you need in consulting? So maybe do that risk assessment and analysis that Sarah mentions in her book, because that could be really helpful. And then think about right work and right work environment. I think those are important as well.
So I'd like to add one thing.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Which is, don't let fear be your guidance, because even when you're making a decision, which is absolutely the right decision, you've thought it through carefully, you've analyzed the pluses and minuses, there's still going to be fear. And, don't take that as an indication that you shouldn't take a risk. And the other thing I want to say is, I think as women, we need to be careful about what I call overestimating the downside and underestimating the risks of inaction. And I just want to highlight that thing about the risks of inaction, because that's what we're really good at identifying what the potential negatives are. But we have to remember that there are risks associated with inaction as well. And when you don't take that move, whether it's to become an entrepreneur, to ask for that raise or whatever, you find yourself in exactly the same unsatisfying situation that you're in right now, which is why you're considering taking the risk. So don't underestimate how staying stuck can be a problem.
That's great advice. We have two more questions. One is from Holly, and she has a question around lateral versus promotional moves. Sometimes staying in a role will get you a promotion sooner than taking the lateral, and sometimes it's the opposite. Any advice on weighing the two, and when waiting for a promotion in one role might be worth it before moving to another opportunity?
Well, I think you have to have, this goes to being the architect of your career. You have to have a sense of where you're going, what you want to accomplish, and which of those things are going to help you get to whatever your quote end goal is. Will that lateral move give you a whole new skill set, introduce you to a whole new network, help you round out your resume, whatever it would be? Or is it just kind of a holding period when there's not much that's going to come from it? And, one thing I want to kind of highlight or ask about is, when you say you're waiting for a promotion, like, why are you what is standing in the way of getting your promotion? And is it accurate to think that if you just sit there for longer and continue to do a good job, that promotion is going to come your way? Or is there something systemic that is going to cause you to never get that promotion? Either, and I both, Laureen is actually the exception to this, but, oftentimes people who are in roles like lawyers, there's just a bias that lawyers can't move to the business side, that lawyers can't do strategic planning. They're like in a little box. Or if you're in purchasing, you're a purchaser, So you have to say, in the culture of this company, is the reason I'm not getting this promotion because it's just like never going to happen.
The other thing that I would add to that in terms of waiting for promotion is, if you really feel, I think this is Holly, sorry. If you really feel, Holly, that you have earned that promotion, don't wait for it. Just take your boss out to lunch or have a Zoom conversation or whatever, and talk about why you feel you've earned that next step. I would be proactive rather than reactive. This is an interesting question from Liz, Sarah. So in taking smart risks and architecting your career, which I think necessarily involves advocating for yourself, how do you do so? How do you navigate explicit or implicit bias that you are being difficult or entitled or the B word?
Yeah, so Liz, I wish I had a really good answer to this, because I think it is absolutely true that women have to navigate a much narrower lane of acceptable behavior in the workplace than do men.
Totally.
And, there's a lot of different kind of pieces of advice out there. Some of them I think are worthwhile and some of them not. I think there's really two sides to this. One of them is you have to understand yourself and understand, like, where, how do you come off for people? How can you still be assertive, but modulate it to be acceptable in the environment you're in? So that's one part. And the second part is, I think that you need to be aware of the culture of your company. And, in a lot of cultures, they're very conflict averse, right? So that requires a certain way of talking about things. Whereas, other cultures are very actually aggressive, that kind of aggressive action is rewarded, and that kind of, I'm going to call it that bro-y culture. Maybe that's not fair, but that's my observation.
It's there. We know it's there.
and in that context, you can be quite aggressive, and that's actually rewarded. So those are the two things. I think you have to know yourself, know how you're coming across, know how people are responding to you. And again, that's an exercise in paying attention and probably getting feedback as well. And then understanding, like, what's acceptable in your in your environment. And I'll give a very quick example of this, which is one of my sons was taking an entry-level job right out of college, and he got a job offer, and I'm like, oh, could you negotiate to get more? And he's like, it's just not done, Mom. And at first, like, I probed him on it, and finally I thought he actually thought this through. That's a no-no in that culture. And so I think that was important to recognize.
So let me just add a couple of things, Liz, and then we'll go to our last question. So totally agree with Sarah on what she had just said. So in my career, and it's been now 42 years, I've been in many bro cultures, old school bro cultures, as well as more recent ones. And then I've been in environments where I've been either the only woman or one of few. And so to Sarah's point, use all your emotional and social intelligence skills to kind of figure out the lay of the land, what's going to work here and what's not. And if there is bias, be it implicit, explicit, or whatever, you can navigate through it. Don't let that hold you back. But to Sarah's point, you have to understand what you're dealing with and kind of how you work through it. So oftentimes when I've been in those situations, just figure the people out. How do I think I can get there without, overburdening, so to speak, the environment with what I need and what I want, so to speak. But again, it's reading the room, using all your social and emotional intelligence skills, and just kind of navigate right through it. One of the things I've always done, and I know Sarah has done this too, I've always tried to be the best at what I can do, right? Because we always fall back on, I know I can do it, I'm very good. And so I've actually had a lot of career success based on being really the best that I can be, and just allowing that to have it direct me through any kind of difficult situations that I've had. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I know that that's helped for me. Our last, go ahead.
Just to add one thing.
Yeah.
This goes back to the asking for help thing I talked about, which is try and plug into who, hopefully you have some allies in the workplace. Ask them about what their experience is. Ask them about what they've seen. Ask them about what they've heard. Too often as women, we feel like we need to go things alone. Partially, I think, because we think that asking for help indicates some kind of weakness. And also because, again, it's risky. You ask people for help and maybe they'll turn you down, or maybe they'll go talk to somebody in the lunchroom and say, I can't believe she didn't know the answer to this, or whatever. But really, my experience is that people are much more willing to help than you might imagine. And that this is the kind of thing, because it's so subtle, that asking people who have done it, or asking people who have done it unsuccessfully, can really help you navigate.
That's a phenomenal point that Sarah's making, guys, because as my career evolved from always needing to be the best, and that was what was going to drive me, what I learned, over the last 20, 25 years is your professional colleagues, those in your circle. So if you're an executive VP, you want to make for sure, to Sarah's point, that you have built relationships with those EVPs, because what I've learned is if the CEO is the person that hires you, or he or she hires you, they are absolutely invested in your success, but not necessarily your peers. So developing those relationships, as Sarah has said, in your peer group, in the corporate world, is so important, because if you have advocates and allies, again, to Sarah's point, you're going to do so much better. It's that asking for help and building those, what I would call side relationships with your peers, that can be really important. Okay, we have time for one more question, and it's from Amber. And the question is, can you talk about how mentorship, Sarah, has shaped your career, and best ways to continue to develop mentorship relationships?
Well, I'm old. And as Laureen said, we were often the only women in the room. No, we were in the same room. Yeah. We were the only women.
Very much so.
And I have to be really honest with you and say that I only later in life did I actually have mentors. early in my career, I didn't have mentors. And somebody who ultimately wound up being a mentor for me well into my career, said to me that she thought that for women of our era, that the women who were able to succeed were very good at what she called self-mentoring. And what she meant by this, and this actually goes back to something that Laureen just said, which was that ability to watch what was going on in the marketplace, in the room, what was working, what was not working, how did people approach dealing with conflict? Like in most cases, these were men, but they were, you could see the time when somebody got in a big brouhaha with somebody and you're like, oh my God, that relationship is over. Don't do it that way. And then you would see somebody who would do something that you consider to be incredibly gutsy, and it just, sailed right through. And so you have to be like, in those days, you had to be kind of a student of like what was going on around you. And let me say, I think that being a student of what is going on around you in your environment, who's succeeding, who's failing, who's getting the senior management's ear, who's not, those things are still really important. I think, the whole topic of mentorship, again, is not like particularly an area of my expertise. There's some great people who do a lot of work in this arena. But one thing that I would say is that when you're dealing with a mentor, first of all, if you're a woman and you're looking for a woman mentor, there's about 1,000 women who are also looking for that woman mentor, because there's just not that many senior women in the environment. So one of the things you have to do is use that access in as prudent a way as possible. And by that, I mean that when you go for advice, you don't say to people, hey, could you give me some career advice? Because like, what, do we have the next 2 weeks? But you go to them with a very specific question, like, I've just been promoted to this role. What is one thing that it's absolutely critical that I do in the next 90 days, in my first 90 days in this job? So you want to ask a very specific question about a very specific challenge that you're facing. I want to expand my network into the sales department. Who's the one person that I should first contact about that? And one of my guests said that every question you ask of these kinds of questions should begin with the word one, because that actually, first of all, focuses that person's thinking. And also, it doesn't seem very overwhelming.
I think that's that's a great answer, Sarah. And it's funny, Amber, because I have a very similar experience to Sarah. Sarah and I both started probably around the same time, very early 80s. And there were very few women in the workplace at our level. And so we probably did self-mentor for several years. And then over time, I developed what I would call probably not mentoring, but relationships with key women and key men in my orbit, be it in the corporate world or outside, that I could ask questions of, that I can say, can I get your help on this compensation issue that I'm working on? Or, be it around my own career or around the work that I was doing. These days, I actually spend a lot of time mentoring people, women that I have worked with over the last, I would say 10 to 15 years, who I see they might need my help in certain areas, what I would call directional career type of mentoring. So I typically seek that person out based on, I worked with her 8 years ago. She is terrific. She may be a little rough around this particular edge. Let me see if I can soften it, because I think it can help her in her next career move. Things like that, helping somebody negotiate a compensation package that I've worked with before, that I want to see her career take off. So as Sarah said, reach out and form those relationships where, if it's not pure mentoring, it's people you can tap in to ask certain questions, be it of your job, your career, the content of your job, or how you push forward. So this was great stuff. Again, please go to Amazon and order Younger Me Career Lessons from 100 Successful Women. And before we end, just want to thank our audience for joining us, staying with us through the chat, and note that we at FLG have a leadership series that we're going to be rolling out for this year, Sarah being our first of this group. And we're going to be hosting on April 22nd, a roundtable on the topic of excellence in board leadership. So please join us for that. We'll get all the information out on our website and in our newsletter. So with that, thank you all for joining us today. Take care. Bye-bye.